Welcome back to the Trying to Figure This Out podcast. I'm your host, Clifton Morris. If you've been with me over the last couple of episodes, I just want to say thank you. I really do appreciate you coming back each week and spending a little bit of your time with me. I know that you have a lot of choices, so the fact that you're here means more than you probably realize. And for my first time listeners, welcome. I'm really glad you found us. Around here, we don't pretend to have life figured out. We're just trying to slow down long enough to ask better questions. Because what I've started realizing is that sometimes one good question can change your life more than 100 answers. So lately, I've noticed something about myself. I keep coming back to the same question. Not because I have the answer, because I don't. But every time I think about it, I notice something else. It's like peeling back an onion. The more I pay attention, the more I realize how many things I've believed for years. And I've never really stopped to examine, but who does? Some of the things that we say or some of the things that we do every day, we don't even question. For example, like negative self talk. I get on my son about that all the time. I personally have always tried to be aware of it, but every now and then it'll sneak up on me and I'll catch myself saying something like, I'm not creative enough, or I'll question myself, am I too old to start over? Now, for some of my younger listeners, you're just asking yourself, where am I going and why am I going there? I've said those things, and maybe you have too. And somewhere along the way, they stopped sounding like passing thoughts and they started sounding like facts. So that's what I've been wrestling with lately. Not whether the statements are true, but where do they come from in the first place? Because I don't remember deciding to believe any of those things. I think they simply became part of the way that I saw the world. And I am sure I'm not the only one who thinks that way. Somewhere along the way, we all inherited ideas, particular ideas, ideas about work, success, money, relationships, failure, life in general, what's possible, and sometimes what isn't. Most of those ideas came from people we love, our parents, our teachers, our coaches, our friends. And I will always refer back to these people because these are the people who influence us the most as we start to grow. These are people who genuinely want the best for us. They weren't trying to limit us, they were trying to prepare us. And for that, I'm grateful. But over the last few years, something has started changing in me. I've started realizing that sometimes the beliefs that helped us in one season can quietly keep us from going into the next. Not because they were wrong, because life changes. We change. So every once in a while, I think we owe ourselves to stop and ask, do I still believe this because it's true? Or because I've carried it for so long? I've never thought about those questions. I don't think most people do. But that's the conversation I'd like to have today. Not because I have the answers. I'll re-emphasize that over and over because I don't. But because I think some of the biggest changes in our lives begin with one simple question. Again, none of us come into this world believing we aren't enough. We weren't born thinking we weren't creative or smart enough or capable enough. Somewhere along the way, we learn those things. And before I go further, kind of want to say this. Sometimes the beliefs that we have are definitely influenced by the people that are closest to us. We don't grow up hating people. We don't grow up disliking people. We don't do any of those things just because that's who we are. Our innate nature allows us to learn these type of behaviors. And the interesting part about that is most of us can't remember where or when we picked these things up. We don't remember the first time someone told us to be realistic. In fact, what does realistic even look like? That's a word I've really been questioning a lot lately. But we'll come back to that at another time. We don't remember the first time we watched someone else's dreams fall apart. We don't remember the first time we decided it was safer to fit in than stand out. Now, for me, I've always been a little bit different. You see, because I'm an only child. I don't know that I've ever spent much of my life trying to fit in. But I also know that that's not true for everyone. For a lot of people, fitting in feels safer than standing out. Somewhere along the way, that also becomes a belief. I think every one of those moments leaves something behind. Not because people were trying to hurt us. Most of the time, they were trying to help us. They were sharing what they knew, what had worked for them, what had helped them provide for their families, what had helped them survive. And there's value in that, guys. There's lots of value in the lessons that we have learned along the way. Again, people can't teach us what they don't know. And oftentimes what they do teach us is what they do know. only because that's all they've ever learned. If you've listened to episode 1, you know I grew up in a single parent household. But the older that I've gotten, the more I've realized that none of us are really raised by just one person. Obviously, there's your parent, the person who was responsible for you, but we are also raised by teachers, coaches, friends, neighbors, other family members, the books we read, the television that we watch, the communities that we grow up in. Some of those influences are direct. Some are so subtle, we don't even realize that they're shaping us. So when I talk about the people who raised me, I'm talking about all of them. And when I think about those people, I don't think about people who limited me. I think about people who loved me, people who sacrificed, people who worked hard, people who showed up. Those lessons shaped me. They made me who I am. And I'll always be grateful to them. But gratitude does not mean I have to stop growing. It doesn't mean that you have to stop growing. It doesn't mean we stop asking questions either. Because what I've started realizing is this, that people who raised us gave us everything that they had, but they couldn't give us what they had never seen. And that's not criticism, it's reality. I've said this before. There were 3 things that I wanted to be when I grew up: a lawyer, a stockbroker, a professor. Those weren't impossible dreams. I just didn't know anyone who had actually done those things. So eventually, those dreams quietly faded into the background. As I'm saying that out loud, I thought about something. For those of you, again, who followed us, you know that I'm an English teacher by trade. And there was this Langston Hughes poem that I taught for years called A Dream Deferred. And it begins with one simple question: what happens to a dream deferred? For years, I thought I was teaching the poem to my students. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized the poem was quietly teaching me, because that's exactly what happened. The dream didn't disappear overnight. It slowly drifted into the background. And not because someone told me I couldn't, but because I couldn't see how. Looking back, I realized it's hard to imagine something that you've never seen for yourself. And maybe that's why so many dreams quietly fade away. How many things have we decided aren't possible simply because we've never seen them? And that's where it comes back to what is realistic and what is not. If you haven't seen something, or the person who most influences you hasn't seen something, then why do you believe it's something that can come true? I don't know the answer, but I know it's a question worth asking, because sometimes the biggest limits in our lives aren't the ones someone places on us. They're the ones we quietly accept without ever realizing we had a choice. Again, the older that I've gotten, the more I've realized something. Just because a belief served me well at one point in my life doesn't automatically mean it still belongs there today. I don't say this with any bitterness. Actually, it's just the opposite. Some of the values I was raised with have served me incredibly well. I have a great work ethic. I'm very dependable. And I try to keep my word as much as I can. Those aren't beliefs I'm trying to leave behind. In fact, I've taught my children the same thing. They're part of who I am. But somewhere over the last few years, I've started looking at life a little differently. I've started asking myself, not is the belief right or wrong, but is the belief still serving the life that I'm trying to build? Life doesn't stand still, and neither do we. So why wouldn't some of our beliefs change too? The other day, I asked my wife something. I said, do you think I've changed as a person? She looked at me with this inquisitive look and said, what do you mean? I told her, I don't know. I just feel like I see things differently than I used to. I don't get caught up in some of the things that used to matter to me. And I feel this pull, this responsibility to help people think differently about their own lives. She sat there for a second and pondered. And then she said something that really resonated with me. She said, I don't think you've changed. I think you've reached a point in life where you want people to become better people. And sometimes that means helping them look inward. I've thought about that conversation a lot, because my first reaction was, well, I never looked at it that way. And maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't changed as much as I thought. That was kind of a bummer. Maybe I had simply grown into another season of my life, because just a few years ago, I don't even think I would have asked that question. When I say a few years ago, I'm talking about 1, 2, hell, even last year. The person I was then isn't exactly the person talking to you today. It doesn't mean the old version of me was wrong. It just means life has a way of changing us. And if we're paying attention, I think sometimes we confuse growth with disloyalty. We think questioning something means we're rejecting the people who've taught us. And I don't believe that. I think that you honor the people who shaped you while recognizing you've grown beyond some lesson that they handed you. To me, that's not disrespect, that's life. Because if we're fortunate, we keep learning, we keep growing, we keep seeing things that we couldn't have understood just a few years ago. Maybe wisdom isn't collecting more beliefs. Maybe it's having the courage to revisit ones that we've carried for years and asking whether they still fit the person we're becoming. I know that's what I've been doing, and I have a feeling I'm not the only one. I don't think that life changes all at once. In fact, I know it doesn't. I've always tried to be objective about life, about the interactions I have with other people, and most importantly, the relationship that I have with myself. And when I look back, I think my questions change first. Sometimes we think life changes because of one big decision, one big moment, one dramatic event, but that wasn't my experience. And I don't think that's most people's experience. For me, it happened quietly. Again, if you've listened to episode 1 or episode 2, I talk about my boys. And one of the changing points for me was when they both entered high school. Something shifted. And it wasn't a crisis. Nothing was wrong. In fact, life was good. I was teaching, I was coaching, I was doing work that mattered. Our family was doing well. And from the outside, there wasn't any reason to be asking, what's next? But I was. And it's not because I was unhappy, but because I could feel a new season coming. And I think a lot of us do. We just ignore it. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about getting my boys ready for the next chapter of their life. I had started thinking about mine. And again, that may have to do something with being in my 50s. That may have to do with starting to see people who used to be around or no longer around. I don't really know, but it was different. And honestly, it caught me off guard. For many years, my purpose had been clear: be a good husband, at least try to be a good father. Again, at least try to be. Those things still matter to me to this day, and they always will. But I started realizing maybe those weren't the only things I was supposed to become. Maybe nobody had given me permission to think about my future. I just finally realized I had been waiting for it. That's when ideas started showing up. And I'm going to be honest with you, I've often had ideas of things that I've wanted to do. I don't know if I was fearful to carry them out as much as I was a procrastinator because I hadn't seen those things done. And that just comes back to the point that I've reemphasized throughout this episode is that if you haven't seen it, how do you know the possibility of it becoming true? I don't know. But then my ideas started showing up again. I'd never seriously considered them before. The writing, the speaking, starting a business, coaching outside of education, building something that was mine. At first, those ideas felt uncomfortable, not because I didn't want them, because they were unfamiliar. And that was something that I just talked about. And honestly, who was I to think that I could do those things? I didn't know anybody who had done them. So why would I naturally believe that I could? And then I caught myself. Wasn't this exactly what we had been talking about? If you've never seen something, it's hard to imagine it for yourself. Maybe that's what exactly was happening to me. For the first time, I was exposing myself to the possibility that I had never seriously considered before. And the more I explored it, the more one question kept coming back. What if there's another chapter that I hadn't given myself permission to write yet? I didn't have a plan. I didn't have everything figured out. I still don't. But this is what I've learned. Sometimes the first step isn't having the answer. Sometimes the first step is giving yourself permission to believe a different future is possible. Guys, that's why you're hearing me on this podcast. I've had this idea for years, and people closest to me know this. I've talked about it, I've workshopped it, I've written it down, I've attempted to record it. And this time I was just like, blanket. I had to substitute blanket for a bad word, but I was just like, hey, I'm going to make it happen. And that's why we're here. So looking back, I'm not changing careers. I'm not walking away from education. What I'm changing is the possibility for my life, and everything else followed. Something interesting started happening once I gave myself permission to think differently. And that's where we are now. I started noticing people who were making changes in their own lives. People starting businesses, people writing books, people deciding to chase something that they had been putting off for years. People who seem to wake up one day and realize that they weren't finished growing. Those were my people. There's a saying that if you want to do something, try to surround yourself with people with like-minded goals. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. The interesting part, though, is that these same people that I'm starting to see start their own businesses and write books and do things that they had put off, those people had always been there. I just hadn't noticed them before. And looking back, I think that's because I had started asking different questions about my life. And that led me to another question. What changed first in their lives? Did they begin asking different questions? Or did they have enough courage to follow the answers that they got from those questions? Maybe that's where change really begins. Not when we ask a different question, but when we're finally willing to live by the answer. Once that thought settled in, guys, I couldn't look at life the same anymore. I stopped thinking so much about what I might lose and I started thinking about what I might miss if I never tried. That was a completely different way of looking at life. But don't misunderstand me. Knowing where you're headed doesn't make leaving where you are any easier. For example, I have rehearsed stepping away from coaching. I've rehearsed talking to my team, and every single time I get choked up. Every time. Because this isn't about walking away from people I don't love. It's exactly the opposite. I love coaching. I love teaching. I love being a part of a young person's journey. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the way I believe I'm supposed to live out that purpose. As I think about it now, I don't think that I'm searching for a new career. I think I'm discovering a new way to express the person I'm becoming. The work isn't changing, only the platform is. Teaching, coaching, writing, speaking, podcasting, maybe even blogging. The platform changes, but the purpose doesn't. For years, I thought my purpose could only be lived out through my job. But lately, I've realized my purpose was never tied to a building. It's always been tied to people. And the realization gives me peace because I finally understand I'm not walking away from who I've always been. I'm finally embracing the person that I'm becoming. As we've talked today, I hope one thing has become clear. This conversation today was never really about changing careers. It's not about starting a business or writing a book. Those are simply different expressions of the same purpose. This conversation has been about becoming intentional, about slowing down every once in a while to examine the beliefs that we've been carrying, to ask whether they still fit the life that we're living today. Because here's what I've learned. Some of the biggest changes in my life didn't happen because I found the right answers. They happened because I finally asked better questions. And once I heard the answers, I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard them. That doesn't mean I suddenly became fearless. I'm still in the middle of this story. But I know I can't go back to living the way that I used to. So before we leave today, I don't want to challenge you to change your life. I think that's too big. Instead, I just want to leave you with one question. What's one belief you've been carrying for years? That deserves another look. You don't have to answer today. Just don't ignore it. Sit with it this week and see where it leads you. I'm still asking myself the same questions. Maybe that's why this conversation matters so much to me. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. I truly appreciate you being here. If this conversation made you stop and think, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Until next time, I'll see you.